Okay, good evening, everybody. We're going to get started. Welcome, everyone, to tonight's workshop. My name is Brian Cofrancesco. I'm the Leadership Development Coordinator for the New England and Bermuda District and a proud member of the Kiwanis Club of Meriden, Connecticut. It's an honor to welcome you to tonight's session, Holding a Successful Annual Meeting. It's nice to see some returning Kiwanians, and I'm seeing some new faces here tonight. And I think I've also seen a few out-of-state folks or out-of-district folks from around the country. So thank you all for joining us, and welcome to those who are watching live on Facebook as well. This is the 15th session in our virtual workshop series of weekly learning opportunities, and we hope you're enjoying them so far. Please do encourage your fellow club members to join us every Wednesday at 7 o'clock for a new workshop or learning opportunity. If anyone is not receiving our emails, you can give us a holler at education@newenglandkiwanis.org, and we will make sure that you are subscribed to our constant contact email list. If you are joining us for the first time, I'm happy to share that all of our workshops can count for interclub credit on your monthly secretary's reports. So if your club has 20 or fewer members and you have 2 members here tonight, or if your club has between 21 and 30 members and you have 3 members here tonight, or if your club has 31 or more members and you have 4 members here tonight, this will count as an interclub for you. And if you have enough members, you actually get to report an interclub with every single club that's here tonight, which is great. Really easy way to get some interclub credit. So as you've already seen, we asked you to please introduce yourself and your club in the chat. That will help us take attendance and let other clubs know how many interclubs they can put on their secretary's report for this month. If you are a secretary or you're taking attendance, you can write down the names of the clubs, or if you click the little ... next to the chat, you can save the chat when the meeting is done and you'll have a full list of everyone who's in attendance. David Griffin, who's the newest member of our education committee, is acting as our interclub liaison, and he is going to take attendance every week. So if you forget to write names down, or if you aren't able to get everyone in, you'll be able to check our Google Drive of resources for a full list of the clubs that were in attendance. Before we start tonight's workshop, some housekeeping items. A reminder to please keep yourself on mute to ensure an uninterrupted presentation. And if you are new to Zoom, the mute button is in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. If you see a line through the microphone, that indicates that you are muted. You are welcome to keep your cameras on. It's always nice to see everyone's faces and to have the feel of an in-person workshop. But if you prefer to keep your camera off, that is 100% fine too. If you have a question for tonight's presenter, you can post that in the chat at any time, either in the group message or directly to me. And I will ask the questions at the end of the workshop in a Q&A session. If you're watching live on Facebook, just drop a comment on the chat or the live stream, excuse me, and we'll include that in our question and answer. Tonight's workshop will be 1 hour, and you will be able to find recordings of it on our Facebook page and on our YouTube channel. So that concludes all my announcements. And with that, we're going to get started. So tonight's session is holding a successful annual meeting. And many of you know, per our bylaws, each Kiwanis Club must hold an annual meeting of its members before May 15th. But you may be asking yourself, what goes into an annual meeting? How are annual meetings held during this new COVID world, this virtual world that we're in? What business do I need to conduct at an annual meeting? Well, tonight we have District Parliamentarian David Wyskiel, who's here to give you the practical suggestions as to what you should do during an annual meeting and how to prepare for your annual meeting. David and I are both members of the Kiwanis Club of Meriden, and so if you don't already know him, I can attest that he is the go-to guy for all things bylaws and procedures. And he's going to share a wealth of information. I'm sure he'll be able to answer all of your toughest questions, so make sure you throw them out there. And I hope that what you learned tonight will be useful in helping you plan your annual meeting. So with that, please join me in a round of applause and welcome our District Parliamentarian, David Wyskiel.
Thank you. It's good to see everyone. I see a lot of faces I recognize and a few new faces. So hello to everyone, and I'm glad you're here tonight. So for the next 2 hours, we're going to be going through bylaws and how to plan an annual meeting. Oh, a couple of people caught the joke. That's good. It's a 1-hour session, and both Brian and Elise have promised to keep me within the right time frame. So I'm going to try to do that. We're going to go through a lot of material. I'm going to try to do it as quickly as possible. We will take questions at the end, and hopefully I've covered what everyone would like to know about annual meetings. So with that, I'm going to start sharing my screen and get started with my PowerPoint on holding a successful annual meeting. So what's the key to a successful annual meeting? Let's see here. It's preparation. You want to prepare in advance, including creating an agenda so you know exactly what you need to accomplish. You want to conduct the meeting using your agenda, because that way it'll go a lot smoother. And then at the end of the meeting, you have to finish with your post-meeting reporting, because no job is done until the paperwork is completed. And we'll go through each of these steps now. So the first thing you want to do is review your club bylaws. And we'll be using tonight the standard club bylaws and policies, which you can find on the Kiwanis.org website. All clubs were required to adopt these form bylaws by September 30, 2014. So hopefully your bylaws are up to date. And if not, we can talk afterwards about getting your club bylaws to where they should be. So when we're reviewing the bylaws, we want to look for provisions about holding the annual meeting, what requirements there are for action by the members, whether officers and directors are elected or appointed, and what matters must be approved by the members. So let's start in the bylaws, and we're going to start with Article 2.2, which talks about members. And members in good standing are entitled to all rights and privileges of the club. And one of those privileges is the right to vote at the annual meeting. But in order to be able to vote, you have to be a member in good standing. And so here in the bylaws, it talks about your obligation to pay dues and fees, and we'll see some other criteria when we get to the policies. There is a requirement that there be one meeting a year of the members, and that meeting be between January 1 and May 15 to be the annual meeting for club elections. The bylaws require that there be at least 30 days notice of that annual meeting given to the members so they can all plan to attend. We need a quorum of members in order to conduct business at the annual meeting, and the quorum requirements under the bylaws are generally 1/3 of all the club members who are in good standing. And whenever you're voting at the meeting, you need a majority of the members present, so a majority of that quorum that's there. Now you'll see the last sentence here in this section 3.5 that says at least 14 days previous notice of any pending vote must be given to the members. And I just want to point out that that's true in most cases, but for the annual meeting, you have to give 30 days notice as required by section 3.3. Article 4.1 is a key article, so we're going to take a look at the different parts to it. First, the officers. Who are your officers? It's a president, immediate past president, a president-elect, a treasurer, and a secretary. And you also may have vice presidents if they're defined in club policy. In addition to the officers, you have to have a minimum of 3 directors, and the number of directors is fixed in your club policy. That no offices may be held by the same person except those of the secretary and treasurer, and no person can serve simultaneously as both an officer and a director. And that's why in section 6.1, the board of directors is defined as the president, immediate past president, the president-elect, the treasurer, the secretary, the vice presidents, and all directors. So what the bylaws try to do is encourage as many people to be participating on this level of the board, and you incorporate a lot of experience and many hands to get the work done. So I want to point out that positions like administrative secretary or an assistant treasurer are not club officers under the current set of bylaws, because the secretary and the treasurer or the treasurer represents those functions on the club board. And if you have a club secretary that's appointed, the president would recommend the appointment to the board, and then the board must approve the appointment. For each officer and director must be a member of good standing in the club. We're going to see that good standing requirement pop up a number of times. And your immediate past president is the most recent president who's willing and able to serve. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be the last president, but most often it is. The secretary can either be appointed or elected, and you'll have to look in your club policy to see which applies to your club. And then for all other officers, including the secretary, if they're not appointed, must be elected at the club's annual meeting by a majority vote following the election process that you'll find in your club policy. Your officers can serve either 1 or 2 year terms, and those terms begin October 1 of each year. And directors can serve up to a 3-year term beginning on October 1st. The other thing you should look at when you're conducting an annual meeting is whether you have to fill any vacancies, because you're going to have all the members around and available. So you might as well fill those vacancies, because under the bylaws, whereas the president would be replaced by a president-elect or an immediate past president as provided in your policy, all other officers and directors, you require new elections. And so since you have all the members present in your annual meeting, you might as well fill any vacancies on your current board. As I indicated previously, the club board consists of all the officers and the directors, and the board has the requirement and the duty and the responsibility to determine the good standing status of members in accordance with club policy. So the board will decide who's a member and who's eligible to vote at your annual meetings. So after you've reviewed your club bylaws, you want to review the club policies. What are we going to look for? We want to look for any criteria for members to be in good standing. We want to see if there's any annual meeting requirements. We want to look for information related to officers and directors, whether they're elected or appointed. And we want to see if there are any details about the club election process that we should be aware of. So let's look at the policies. And policy B, and this is the standard policy, a mandatory policy, will indicate what the requirements are for a member to be in good standing in your club. And so you should have filled in whether good standing means you're so many months in, or you won't be in good standing if you're so many months in arrears, or if you're a dollar amount in arrears. And then there could be other requirements, such as if you had service requirements or hours requirements for participation or attendance requirements at lunches. So the board should look and make sure everyone who's going to be at the annual meeting is eligible to vote. Policy C describes our number of vice presidents, and hopefully in section 1 you filled in the number of vice presidents that you will have. In section 2, we indicate the number of directors. So for example, in the Meriden Club, we have a board that's 17 members, and 10 of those are directors and the other 7 are the officers. And then section 3 under this officers and director policy will indicate that a vacancy in the office of president would be filled by whichever other officer. And most often it's the president-elect, but it could be an immediate past president or one of your vice presidents. But that should be indicated. Section D indicates the terms for each of the officers and the directors. The president can serve either a 1 or a 2 year term. The secretary would serve as a 1 or a 2 year term, and if they're appointed, their term should be the same as that of the president. The treasurer can serve a 1 or a 2 year term. Your vice presidents can serve a 1 or a 2 year term, and the directors can have a 1, 2, or 3-year term. And if you're going to have directors serving for 3 years, you probably want to talk about staggering the terms so you're not replacing all the directors every year. The election process is in section E, and you indicate first whether or not the secretary is elected or appointed. And if the club secretary is not elected, then they should be appointed no later than 1 week after the elections are held. The election process also includes having ballots and having volunteers count the ballots if needed be and certifying the results. It should provide for nominations in advance or from the floor. And the key thing to nominations, they must be made with the consent of the person you're nominating, because we want everybody to serve voluntarily and not be coerced or forced into participating. Section 4 is important. It talks about voting. Cumulative voting is not allowed. So if you were voting for, let's say, 3 director positions, you couldn't put all 3 votes in favor of one person to make sure they got elected. You just get 1 vote per person if you're voting for 3 directors. Your policies can also state whether or not you accept absentee ballots or proxy ballots, that is somebody voting on behalf of another. Section 5 indicates that you only need ballots if there's more than 1 nominee for any office. And if you had multiple nominees, then you may have several ballotings and removing from the voting the nominee who receives the least number of votes. But most of the time, we're going to see just probably 1 nominee for each position. And I think that's pretty common these days. Electronic balloting is permitted for club elections. Kiwanis 1 has a management system that would allow you to have ballots electronically if you were going to have elections. And I believe there's also electionbuddy.com that would allow you for free balloting for up to 20 users. Afterwards, once all the officers and directors are elected, the club secretary must certify the election results to Kiwanis International. After their election and before October 1st, you refer to each of the officers by the title designate. So you'd have president-elect designate or secretary designate or president designate. If there are any other requirements for the election process, they would be listed in section 9. Some clubs have other club positions, and section J is where those positions would be listed. So now that we've reviewed the club bylaws and policies, what's next? We should see if there's any special state law requirements for meetings of members of non-stock or charitable corporations like Kiwanis clubs. The pandemic has posed a number of challenges, and so we need to determine, do we have to meet in person or can we meet electronically? And what I found out after doing some research is that each state in the district has different laws. So let's start with Standard Club Bylaw 3.2. It says that subject to the laws of your local jurisdiction, the club members may meet and conduct business by any method that allows participants to simultaneously communicate with each other or is otherwise allowed by law. And so this would seem to allow electronic meetings, Zoom or otherwise, as long as everybody can see each other, everyone can hear each other, and that type of communication would be allowed. But the question is, does your state allow electronic meetings? So here's the big warning. This is not legal advice, and you should consult a lawyer in your state or jurisdiction for any questions about your state laws and how they apply to your club bylaws and policies. However, I took an informal survey of lawyers in the various states, and I want to tell you what I found out. So in Connecticut, state law requires that member meetings be in person, but we have a governor's executive order, number 7NN, that allows virtual meetings if they're approved by the board of directors, attendance at the meeting can be verified, and members can reasonably participate in the meeting and vote. I just want to point out that that executive order is only good for the duration of the public health emergency, and as of today, it's currently set to expire on April 19, 2021, unless it's extended. In Maine, there are no express provisions for electronic meetings of members, so the bylaws would control. And absent a bylaw, the default would require an in-person meeting. Massachusetts adopted a special act after the pandemic started, and they allow virtual meetings on the same conditions as we saw in Connecticut. If the meetings are approved by the board, if attendance at the meeting can be verified, and members can reasonably participate in the meeting and vote. In Massachusetts, that special act is in effect for the duration of the public health emergency and for 60 days thereafter. And as of March 12th, when I spoke to an attorney in Massachusetts, the public health emergency was still in effect. In New Hampshire, there are no express provisions for electronic meetings of members. So you'd look at the articles of organization and the bylaws for what's allowed. In Rhode Island, there are no state requirements for people to meet in person for annual meetings for what they call non-stock corporations, like Kiwanis clubs, and you would look to the bylaws to determine if electronic meetings are possible. Unfortunately, I was not able to find a Vermont Kiwanian who's an attorney to give me any information. If you do know anyone, let me know, and I'll be glad to follow up and find out what Vermont allows. So we've looked at the bylaws and policies. We've looked at our state law requirements. We are able to establish our election process. We've confirmed the officers and directors and whether they need to be elected or appointed. And so the next step is to set our annual meeting date between January 1 and May 15. Now, because we need 30-day notice, that May 15 date is coming up pretty quickly. So your board should set the meeting date and notice should go to your members as soon as possible. And that's just a summary of what we just talked about. So the first tip I have is that you should be forming a nominating committee. And here's a suggested policy that our club uses. And so at least 5 weeks prior to the annual meeting, the president appoints a nominating committee. That committee has not less than 5 members, and we look for it to be a majority of past presidents who understand the club and understand what it takes to be an officer. The president designates the chairperson of the committee, and the duties of the committee are to make nominations with the consent of those nominated, and if necessary, prepare a ballot for the election. Now, your nominating committee has goals that you want to encourage as many club members to serve as possible. You want to encourage diversity on your board because that way your club can grow, you can attract new members, and you can do more in your community. You want to balance the board with newer members and more experienced members. And you want to use the composition of your board as a training ground for upcoming officers. And for example, in Meriden, we have 10 directors, and 5 of those are past presidents, and 5 are other members of the club that we want to use to get them used to the leadership experience and hopefully train them to become upcoming officers. The nominating committee would then report the results to the board. And this is the policy we use in Meriden, that at least 2 weeks before the annual meeting, the committee submits to the board the president-elect as the sole nominee as president, a list of nominees for each office to be filled, and a list of nominees for the number of directors. So key here is that the nominating committee actually reports back to the board, and the board accepts the report of the committee and approves a proposed slate of officers and directors that will go before the members at the annual meeting. There's always the question of nominations from the floor. So our club uses this policy that at least 1 week before the annual meeting, at one of our regular meetings, we'll announce the slate of officers and directors, and we'll ask for nominations from the floor ahead of time. And so then that list of nominations plus the results from the nominating committee are what's submitted at the annual meeting as our officers and directors for election. So there's a couple of reminders: provide at least 30 days advance notice to the club that the elections will take place, and tell the members about the proposed slate of officers and directors so they can either agree that that's a great group, or they can make their own nominations as they see fit. And you always want to remind your members that it's important they attend the annual meeting because you need a quorum in order to conduct business. And as we saw before, the standard bylaws require at least 1/3 of the club members to be present for there to be a quorum. And those club members have to be members in good standing. So we're going to conduct the meeting. First step, you want to create your agenda. So I recommend you use an agenda that includes the president opening the meeting and welcoming the members. It's just a good start. The president should announce if there's a quorum present, and that way business can be conducted if there is. The president should give a brief annual club report. Now remember, you've got all your members together, or a good number of them, so you might as well tell them what's going on with your club. And it may encourage people to become more active because some members just show up for the annual meeting. You can talk about upcoming projects or fundraising, and this is a good way to get a lot of your members on board if they're not actively participating already. Next item on the agenda should be approving the minutes of the prior annual meeting. Because that was a member meeting, the members should approve the minutes. And then the treasurer should give an annual financial report. And that way the members can know what the financial situation is of the club. Now remember, that financial report is only for information purposes only. There's no vote to accept it because approval of all financial reports comes from your annual audit. Next item on the agenda should be to receive the report of the nominating committee. And then you can again ask for nominations from the floor in case there's a member present who would like to expand the number of nominees. If there are none, then you ask for a motion to close the nominations. And if there are multiple candidates, then you are required to have a ballot. And when you do have a ballot, you'll need to appoint an election committee, distribute the ballots, and the secretary would count the ballots, give the results to the president. The candidate with the majority of votes would be the winner. The president should then announce the successful candidate. There's no reason to indicate the vote. And then the president should ask for a motion to destroy the ballots. That way it keeps secret the actual vote tally. Now, when there's only one candidate, a member can move that the secretary cast one vote in favor of the entire slate of officers and directors as proposed. If the members make that motion and vote, then after the member vote, the secretary casts one ceremonial ballot and the president announces that the slate has been elected. And after the election, the secretary must report the new officers to Kiwanis International, and that's done online. Otherwise, your club will not be in good standing with Kiwanis International. And one of the penalties is you wouldn't be allowed delegate credentials at the International Convention. You also won't be allowed delegate credentials if your club has not paid its dues to Kiwanis International. So here's an agenda tip. While you have all your members there, fill any vacancies on your current board that may require member approval. Review and obtain approval any bylaw changes or policy changes that you're making. Because again, those require member votes and you might as well do it while you have a quorum present. Another agenda tip would be to review and obtain approval of your fundraising projects. And this is key because number one, it brings those fundraising projects to the members so they know what's going on. Two, it gives you a record of those projects and so they're all covered by Kiwanis insurance. And so what I recommend doing is you ratify any past fundraising events that weren't adopted by the members. You approve any upcoming fundraising events and that you obtain approval of any projects that may take place after September 30th and that may extend into the new administrative year. Now, and the reason you can do that is because it's going to be a member vote and not a board of director vote. The board can't commit another board, but the members, as the key decision makers of the club, can commit multiple boards by their vote. Another agenda tip is you may want to add dues onto your agenda. Under Standard Bylaw 8.5, all your membership dues, fees, and other assessments must be approved by a 2/3 vote of the members present and voting with at least 14 days notice of the proposed amount given to the members. So what you may want to do is consider authorizing your current board in conjunction with the new board, the board designate, to adopt the budget and the dues for the next administrative year prior to September 30th. And why would you want to do that before the new board year? Well, we can do that because nothing prevents the members from pre-approving the dues, especially if it's the amount that's already in place in the policy. It would allow dues bills to go out in September. And if the bills go out before October 1st, any membership changes and members that want to resign with dues can and should do so before October 1st. So they won't be on the next year's roster for KI dues, and that would save you money for having to pay for a member who does not want to belong in the next year. And remember, the dues is part of your club policies, so if you're going to change your dues, you need to update your club policies. Next item on the agenda, right before the end, you should ask if there are any other matters to come before the members. This sometimes is tricky, but it's also a good forum for members to talk to the board and to the officers about any concerns they have. And then you would ask for a motion to adjourn and formally close out the meeting. Well, you just had a great meeting. What happens next? You need to make sure the secretary prepares minutes of the meeting. And so there's a record of everything that happened. And you want to make sure your secretary updates the Kiwanis International website at kiwanis.org. Now I have some screenshots courtesy of the Meriden Kiwanis Club Secretary, Melissa Neville Passarelli. So Melissa, thank you. And so this is what it looks like. You'd sign on to members.kiwanis.org. You get this lovely sign-in screen. When you sign in, you then come upon a second screen. You're going to look for the button on the left that says Secretary Dashboard. You'll then get a screen that talks about your club. You'll see it says Club Elections. And if you click on the section that says 2021, that's your officers for the current year, you'll get a listing of who KI thinks are your current officers. If you change to the 21-2022 year, you can then fill in the names of all your newly elected officers and directors. They're also looking for your membership growth committee chair, your club PR and marketing chair, and some information about your service leadership programs too. But it's really easy to update, and it would put you in good standing with Kiwanis International. And also that allows KI to communicate with your officers beginning October 1st so that any official international communications can go to the correct person. So that's the presentation in a nutshell. I'll be happy to answer any questions and see if I can help you out in any way. I'm going to stop screen sharing now.
Well, thank you, Dave. That was incredible. That's so much information in one short presentation. So thank you for putting it all together. We actually had a lot of questions come in, so I hope you're ready.
All right.
The first one, and I know you did answer this after you first mentioned it, but it might be good to revisit it. How do you determine members in good standing? Is that based on dues paid members or members who are active and engaged in club activities? We struggle getting a quorum because we have many members on paper, but only a handful of us have been active in the last year.
All right. Well, as we saw in the slides, members in good standing are defined by your club. So I think you have to look at the policy and see what your policy says about who's a good member in good standing in your club. Could be a financial restriction, or you could have had service restrictions or participation restrictions. That's up to each club. But really, the Kiwanis International mandatory policy only talks about a financial commitment and whether people are current with their financial commitments.
Excellent. And just a reminder, if you do have questions that are coming to you now, please drop them in the chat. You can send them to myself or to Elise, or you can drop them in and send them to everyone. Next question. If assistant secretaries or treasurers are no longer officers, does that mean they cannot vote at board meetings?
That would be correct, because they're not officially members of the board. Now, what you could do is you could make them directors, because they're not technically officers, so they can serve as directors, and you wouldn't violate the prohibition of people serving as officers and directors at the same time. And that would probably be my recommendation. But otherwise, under the current bylaws, unless you've had some special provision in your bylaws to continue those positions, and Kiwanis International pre-approved that, they would not be technically officers.
Excellent. Next question. Can you explain cumulative voting again?
All right. Cumulative voting is, if you have 3 directors that you're voting for, and let's say there are 5 candidates for 3 director positions. So you get to vote for 3 persons. So you have 3 votes. You can't say, I want to put all 3 of my votes for candidate A and hope to carry that candidate over and above the other candidates. So you get 1 vote per candidate nominee, and so you have to just vote once for everyone. You can't put all 3 of your votes toward just 1 person. And that's what cumulative voting would allow. Voting, taking all your votes, your 3 director votes, and putting them all toward 1 person only.
All right, next question. Does voting have to be confidential?
That's a good question. I think the ballot process is intended to be confidential for the purposes of elections. So I would say, yes, if there's an actual election, ballots should be used and confidentiality preserved.
All righty. Does the appointment of club secretary need to be ratified by the board? If so, is that at the annual meeting or after October 1st?
All right. If the president is appointing a secretary, the board does have to approve the appointment. and it would be the board designate that would have to make to ratify the appointment. And so I think that could be done preliminarily by the board designate if it met ahead of time. Otherwise, it should be done at the first October meeting.
Okay, moving along. We have, do proxy and absentee ballots count towards a quorum? And can Zoom chat or Zoom polls or live verbal voting be used for voting?
All right. If your club allows proxy voting or absentee voting, then that counts toward the quorum. But you have to have it in your policy that you allow such items. I know in the Meriden policies, we do not allow proxy voting and we do not allow absentee votes. You have to be personally present. So I think the quorum for us is everyone who's actually there. Now, whether you can use Zoom voting or what were the other alternatives, Brian?
Zoom polls, Zoom chat, or verbal voting.
I think if there's an actual election between two candidates, you want to maintain confidentiality. And so I think any means that may be able to attribute a vote to an individual voter should be discouraged. And that's why the election buddy or something else that may be recommended by Kiwanis International should be used for electronic balloting, where each person's vote is kept secret.
Excellent, thank you. I have to say, you must be loving this, that this many people have these great questions about bylaws details. I can tell you're on cloud nine. Okay, so I'm gonna jump back a little bit. We just had a follow-up question come in. I believe it was about cumulative voting. Do you have to vote for, let's say, 3, or can you just bullet vote, just one person and not vote for the other 2?
If you have a ballot and you would need to pick 3 out of 5 and you just happen to pick 1 out of 5, well, that's your prerogative. You can not use your other votes if you want, but that's a misuse of the democratic process. You need to select 3 people. I mean, the top 3 vote getters are going to win, so you might as well have a say in which 3 out of the 5 are going to be elected. But yes, you don't have to vote for any of the candidates if you don't want to.
So our next question, I think I'm going to make an assumption that many folks with us tonight, this might have taken them by surprise. I had no idea that the club has to approve the dues amount. Is that new? And can that be approved closer to October 1st if we have not set a budget for the new year by our annual meeting?
Yes, you can. The members can approve the dues at any point in time. My recommendation is to do it as early as possible so that you can avoid the problem that we often have in the Meriden Club, where people get a dues bill and then don't tell us to the middle of October or the end of October they don't want to be a member. At that point, we're committed to Kiwanis International to pay their international and district dues. And we really don't have a recourse to them because they said, hey, I don't want to be a member and I gave you my resignation. So what we do is we try to establish the dues at least a month ahead of time, and then send out the dues bills in September with a warning that you must resign by October 1st. And usually that's good to be able to clear the roster by October 1st and avoid getting unnecessarily charged by KI. And what we do is, in order to accomplish that, we allow the current board to set the dues for the following year as long as it's done with the cooperation of the board designate. And the 2 boards can set the dues. We've been on a consistent track, so it really hasn't been anything unusual over the past couple of years. But we do go through the budget process in August, late August, in order to accomplish that.
So a question that kind of came in as almost a follow-up. What if the board ends up needing to increase the dues amount after the club has approved dues at the annual meeting? Can that dues amount be changed?
Yes, it can, as long as there's a member vote. You know, remember that your members set the dues, and if you find out you need more money, all the members, you have to have a member meeting. The board just can't do it. The members have to decide, okay, we're going to assess X number of dollars more of all the members. And then you've fulfilled the bylaw requirement of the members deciding.
Excellent, thank you. Next question. Does the penalty for not registering carry over to the district convention as well and not allow a club to vote in the House of Delegates?
That's a good question. I don't believe I've ever seen that enforced on the district level. But I would, you know, and I can't recall off the top of my head there being a bylaw or a policy provision that would prevent a club from sending delegates for not registering their new officers.
Okay. Dues are going to a prorated structure starting October 1st. Does that mean that clubs will need to amend their bylaws next year?
Dues, maybe they can, I'm not sure I understand the question.
So I think it's saying that the Kiwanis International dues structure is changing to prorated on October 1st. So will clubs need to amend, all clubs need to amend their bylaws to reflect that change?
Short answer would be yes, there would have to be an amendment if dues is changing. And hopefully KI will give us a new form that would tell us exactly what we need to do, and we don't have to invent it ourselves. I haven't seen any change yet.
Excellent. All right. So our next question comes from Larry Wade, who asked if he could unmute himself to ask because it's a little complicated to type out. So Larry, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you, Brian and Dave. Good evening.
Hi, Larry.
This goes back to 2014 when we did the standard form of bylaws. After that date, Kiwanis International actually added in the standard $17 insurance fee for all members. We had done our bylaws prior to that, and I had asked Kiwanis International at the time if that meant I had to go back and change it. And they said, oh, no, don't do that yet, because not everybody's done their standard form of bylaws. And we will let you know when we want you to change the dues section of your bylaws. To this date, I have never heard anything from Kiwanis International about updating our dues section of the bylaws.
Well, remember, dues only shows up in the policies. Okay, so and that's, you know, more an internal decision by your board, as long as, so
we do set dues by member vote, and we have our dues, but they don't match what's written in the policy.
oh, well, you know, at this point I would say that they should be changed, and you know, and you should just notify Kiwanis International that you've changed that part of the policy. I mean,
okay, if Kiwanis is going to go to a different structure in October, it's not worth fighting with them now. I just wait and hope that they do that. Thank you.
Yep.
We've changed them multiple times by member vote, so that's okay.
All right. Thank you, Larry. So next question. In Connecticut, after April 19th, is Meriden, for example, going to meet in person?
Okay, if the question's referring to the governor's executive order, then hopefully what I'm expecting is that the legislature will extend the governor's executive powers and for another short time until the pandemic really gets resolved. And so I see an extension coming on for that April 19th deadline. Unfortunately, we won't know that until sometime in April. The other thing I need to tell the people in Connecticut that I know that the lawyers in the Connecticut Bar Association are aware of this issue and are proposing legislation to permanently cure the problem. But I haven't seen that legislation adopted as yet. Right now, I'm expecting the governor's executive powers to be extended at least for a short period of time beyond April 19th. And to have that annual meeting ability to hold it electronically continued, because many nonprofit, non-stock corporations are all in the same problem, all in the same boat with it.
All right, Dave. Well, that concludes the questions that have been submitted. That was a marathon of questions. You did a really good job answering those back to back. Before we conclude, are there any closing thoughts or things that you'd like to share with attendees tonight?
No, is there a question? Fred, do you have a question?
Yes, I actually have two. One is on having 1/3. Is it 1/3 of all members or 1/3 of members in good standing for a quorum?
For a quorum, it would be 1/3 of members in good standing. Because the other, if you're not in good standing, you don't have the right or privilege to vote.
Okay, and the second question is, you announce a meeting and less than 1/3 show up.
Great question. All right, so if you call the meeting and you're there and you have less than a quorum, the president would open the meeting, and then somebody should make a motion in order to postpone the meeting to a later time so that a quorum could be obtained. And at that point, there would be a brief postponement of the meeting, and you'd be out there calling people to get their tails into the meeting and just show up. If not, then you can postpone, reopen the meeting and entertain a motion to postpone the meeting to a new date in time. And that way
if you don't have time to do that before the 17th.
Well, I think, the key is, did you schedule your first meeting within the time frame that was set in the bylaws? If for some reason you didn't have a quorum and you postponed the meeting to another date, I think you fulfilled your bylaw requirements for the meeting, and just meet after that, have your elections with the proper quorum, and report it to Kiwanis International. I mean, it may be technically not perfect, but it's about as close as you're going to get in that case. And it's through no fault of the club really, or the officers, because you scheduled the meeting within the proper time frame.
Thank you.
And Dave, one more question did come in through the chat. Can the annual meeting be in a hybrid format?
I would say yes. As long as you're allowed to have the electronic portion of the meeting, and all of your electronic members that are participating can hear what's happening and participate as if they were there, then yes, you can have a hybrid version. In fact, you'd find in your bylaws and even most state laws that a board can meet electronically or in the hybrid model, as long as whoever's calling in or participating can hear what's going on and participate. Unfortunately, it's just a little different from member meetings where they've always insisted they be in person. Probably because the size of membership meetings are much larger than boards. But I'd say the hybrid model works as long as everyone can participate, hear each other, and simultaneously know what's going on. Oh, I should mention there's one other possibility that I haven't researched, but I think is probably true in all states, that if you could get 100% of the members signing on to a certain action, those written consents would function in place of a regular meeting. But it does require 100% of your members signing written consents, unless your bylaws provided something else. But 100% of anything more than a handful of members is difficult to assemble the proper voting on. And email votes don't count. I'll just indicate that. Emails, you don't have the ability to really track who's sending the email, even though you think. It may tend to lead to proxy voting when it's not allowed, because you may have one email address for a husband and wife or two people at the same address. And how do you know it's really one person voting or both people voting the same way? So email votes, not permitted. If they are these written consents, they should be in writing with a signature by the members.
Excellent. Well, that concludes the presentation. That's all the questions we've had come through. Thank you so much, Dave.
You're welcome. Thank you, everyone.
That was the most number of questions I think we've gotten for any of our workshops so far. So that's great. So with that, we're going to do some closing announcements and a couple things to keep in mind as we go into the next few weeks. To start, let's give Dave a big round of applause for putting that together. Going through the bylaws and the policies and talking to lawyers in multiple states is not an easy job. So thank you for pulling all that together for today. So a special notice for club secretaries. After you hold your annual meeting this spring, be sure to order your free printed copies of Kiwanis's leadership guides for your club officers that need them. This year, because we won't be having an in-person, we didn't have an in-person midwinter conference, we are taking orders via an online form for printed copies. They'll also be available digitally if that's the preference. This year, only clubs that submit an order will receive printed copies. So we're trying to get this out to every club to make sure we cover everyone who is interested in a printed copy of the leadership guide. Secretaries, you will receive an email next week with all the details, but those of you who are here tonight get advance notice. So we are going to drop the link in the chat, and if you would like to order it, you can order it right now if you want, or you can wait until you've had your annual meeting. The deadline, like our annual meetings, is May 15th. And we just ask secretaries to please consult with officers before placing the order. Last year's leadership guide is the same as this year's. And so help us save paper and postage by only ordering the number that you need. As we wrap up, please remember to put your name and your club in the chat if you haven't introduced yourself yet. This is going to help us keep accurate attendance so our attendees can report interclubs on their secretary's reports. So at this time, I'm going to ask Elise to pull up her shared screen with what we have in store for you next week, our final March virtual workshop. Okay, so we have one more workshop for this month. Next week, we will round out our March sessions with a conversation with Governor Dennis Murphy Murphy. So Governor-elect Gala Bartlett is going to sit down with Dennis to talk about his background and his goals for the year, his Kiwanis service, and much more. And there will also be time for a question and answer at the end. So please join us next week as we get to know a little bit more about our district governor, the person who we've elected to lead us during this Kiwanis year. Now, all Kiwanians will receive an email tomorrow morning announcing our April sessions, our schedule of workshops. But because you're all here tonight, we're going to give you a sneak peek. So Elisa's going to pull up our April schedule so we can tell you what we have coming up for you this spring. So we hope you will join us on April 7th. We are presenting There Is No Strength Without Struggle. We are going to be welcoming Jim Janisic from the Ohio District, who is our USA Region 1 Club Strengthening Advisor, and Emily Sharp from Kiwanis International, who is our area director. And they are going to share ideas and resources for building strong clubs. Then on April 14th, Sean Smith from the Pennsylvania District will present LGBTQ and You, creating safe and positive environments for LGBTQ youth in service leadership programs. This session will provide a baseline understanding of the current gender terminology, an overview of the gay rights movement, and how to interact with students and fellow club members who identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or queer. And that is coming up on April 14th. Many of you have heard either in past workshops or through the grapevine that the district is offering initiatives to encourage clubs to recruit new members this year. So on April 21st, we are going to host new member initiatives from the New England and Bermuda District. We will have membership committee co-chair Bob Wiley and other district leaders who are going to talk about the new initiatives that will support you and your clubs in recruiting and retaining members. And we will wrap up our April sessions on the 28th with Elizabeth Warren, who is the manager of corporate relations at Kiwanis International. She will be presenting Learn More About Kiwanis Partners, and she's going to provide an overview of the various opportunities that Kiwanis International's partners provide for both members and for clubs. So remember to sign up for these free workshops and encourage your fellow members to do the same. Tomorrow morning around, I think 7 or 7:30, you will get our email with all these details. Please make sure you share it with your members. You can also find information on our district Facebook page, in our district Facebook group, in the registration link that we'll put in the chat, and on the district website. If you aren't able to attend a workshop, many of them will be uploaded to our YouTube channel, and you can also find them on Facebook. We have been keeping a folder of all the resources that are shared in the presentations from our workshops to date. You can find that link in your confirmation email that you received this morning, and we'll also put a link to Google Drive in the chat. You can go back and find the presentations our presenters used, and you can also find attendance lists so you can see what clubs were in attendance for the purpose of reporting interclubs. I would like to thank our district education committee members. We have Elise DeNorfia, Judy Barrett, and David Griffin, who are all helping behind the scenes to make these weekly workshops successful. So if you could all give them a round of applause. It takes a team effort, really, to make these happen. And we are continuing into the spring, so look forward to more workshops this April, May, and June. So with that, please thank you again to our presenter, David Wyskiel, and to each of you for joining us and supporting this workshop series. We did have a few Kiwanians from other districts. I saw someone on Facebook tuning in from Barbados. So thank you to all Kiwanians from across International and our district who are joining us this evening. We hope to see you next Wednesday for a conversation with Governor Dennis Murphy. In the meantime, stay safe, be well, and have a great night.